If you want to, like, completely destroy a person's drive to succeed, just give them a gold star for every single thing they do.
Oh, absolutely. Just ruin it.
Yeah, just shower them with unearned trophies, tell them every minor, basic effort is a massive victory, and within a couple of weeks, their internal motivation will completely evaporate.
It sounds so incredibly counterintuitive, right? Especially in our culture today that just champions constant positive reinforcement.
Right, but it gets to the absolute core of how we actually build resilience. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are looking at a really fascinating stack of sources from the Martin County PL.
That's the Police Athletic League.
Exactly. We have their actual curriculum pages on resilience, and even better, we have a raw, real-world transcript from one of their youth mentorship sessions.
Which is such a rare opportunity, getting that fly-on-the-wall perspective of how these concepts are taught in real time. Because the contrast between, a polished curriculum and a room full of actual teenagers is pretty stark.
It really is.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to extract a master class on resilience by analyzing how these specific mentors, Coach AJ, Coach Bob, Coach Matt, and Coach Kimberly, how they take these incredibly dense psychological concepts and translate them into practical tools.
And for you listening, whether you are mentoring someone yourself or trying to lead a team through a difficult quarter or, just trying to navigate your own personal setbacks, the strategies we're going to unpack here are highly applicable.
Because the underlying mechanics of human connection and overcoming adversity, they operate on the same hardware, whether a person is 15 or 50.
Exactly.
But before we step into that room, I do need to establish one really crucial rule for our conversation today. Because we have the raw transcript of this session, we want to fiercely protect the privacy of the amazing kids in that room.
Naturally.
So we won't be using any of their real names. We'll simply refer to them as the youth, the students, or our future leaders.
It's a critical boundary. It lets us focus entirely on the methodology rather than the individuals in the room.
Exactly. So let's set the scene. You have a room full of teenagers. Some are leaning in, right? But others are sitting in the back, arms crossed, just waiting out the clock.
Totally normal. That's just the environment.
Right. That's not a failure. That's just where they are. And if you want to teach a heavy, often cliched concept like resilience, you have to meet those future leaders exactly where they are.
You can't just talk at them.
No. And Coach AJ is up first, and he doesn't try to pump up the room with some soaring, hype speech. He asks a brutally honest question. He says, raise your hand if life has been just absolutely fair to you.
Wow.
Yeah. And he specifically lists it out. Having parents still together, no financial problems, no abuse, no exposure to drugs. He asks who has had a perfectly fair run.
And let me guess.
Not a single hand goes up. Everyone in the room agrees life is unfair, even if their individual struggles look completely different. But okay, let's unpack this for a second. Because my instinct as a leader would be to jump straight into problem solving. By starting the session having everyone explicitly admit that life is rigged against them, it feels a bit like stepping onto the starting line of a race and announcing that everyone's shoelaces are tied together.
Right, like why even run?
Exactly. Doesn't that just validate the urge to give up?
It seems like it would invite a victim mindset. But the psychological mechanism at play here is actually normalization.
Normalization. Okay, how so?
Well, when a person, teenager or adult, is navigating trauma or some systemic disadvantage, the absolute loudest internal narrative they hear is isolation.
Well, that makes sense.
Right? The brain interprets suffering as a unique personal defect. It tells you, I am the only one dealing with this, which means something is fundamentally wrong with me.
So by asking that question and watching zero hands go up, Coach AJ instantly shatters that isolation.
Exactly. He's effectively telling them that their pain isn't a disqualification. It's the standard entry point. He establishes a shared baseline of reality.
Because if he had walked in and delivered a speech about how anyone can achieve anything with just a positive attitude.
Oh, they'd tune him out. The youth dealing with real heavy issues would immediately categorize him as inauthentic. Their threat detection systems would go off.
Right. They'd think, this guy has no idea what my life is actually like.
Exactly. They would perceive that he doesn't understand their environment, which renders his advice useless. So by acknowledging the mud they're all standing in, he bypasses that defensive response.
The framing shifts from the isolating thought of, why is this happening to me? To a collective, well, this happens to everyone, so how do we move forward?
Exactly. These mentors aren't there to give speeches or fix every kid. They're there to connect.
Once the room is grounded in that shared reality, the curriculum introduces famous figures to illustrate resilience. But instead of showing highlight reels, they completely deconstruct these cultural icons.
They bring up Michael Jordan and Simone Biles.
Yes. And with Jordan, they don't lead with the 6 championships. They talk about the Jordan rules, the opposing strategy in the late 80s where teams would literally physically assault him on the court to stop him.
Right, they highlight the struggle.
Yeah, they highlight that he lost 300 games. He missed 9,000 shots. He missed 26 game-winning shots where his entire team trusted him with the final play, and he failed.
They are stripping away the mythology of innate greatness.
Exactly. And then they move to Simone Biles. They don't start with her being the most decorated gymnast in history. They start with her early childhood in foster care.
Surviving abuse.
Yes. And they specifically focus on the Tokyo Olympics, where she experienced the twisties, that terrifying mental block where a gymnast loses their spatial awareness in midair. And she chose to pull herself out of the competition.
Right.
But here is where I struggle a little bit with this approach. I mean, isn't bringing up a billionaire athlete and an Olympic gold medalist a massive disconnect?
How do you mean?
Well, how does a kid dealing with an eviction notice or a failing grade relate to Simone Biles?
Okay, I see what you're saying. It would definitely be a disconnect if the mentors presented them as aspirational end goals, but they are using them to dismantle the pedestal effect.
The pedestal effect.
Yeah, we have this societal habit of attributing extraordinary success to genetics or some magical innate trait.
Oh, right. Like he was just born to play basketball.
Exactly. If you assume Michael Jordan was just born with a resilience gene, you are off the hook. You don't have to try, because you clearly weren't born with that same gene.
Oh, wow. So the mentors are intentionally tearing down that pedestal to expose the messy, painful foundation underneath.
Right. They are proving that resilience is an acquired skill, built entirely on top of public, humiliating failures.
One of the coaches actually reinforces this by saying that Jordan didn't wake up and identify as the guy who missed 9,000 shots. He identified as the guy who keeps shooting.
It's a complete refusal to let the worst moments become a permanent identity.
And the Simone Biles example introduces an even more sophisticated layer, I think. We often equate resilience with blind perseverance. Just push through the pain at all costs.
You're right. Just grit your teeth.
But Biles demonstrated that true resilience requires profound self-awareness. It takes immense strength to stand on the world stage and say, my mental and physical health are compromised, and stepping back is the necessary choice to protect myself and my team.
Which is huge. For a youth who might equate taking a mental health break with weakness or failure, that completely redefines what winning looks like.
Okay, so realizing your heroes fail is inspiring, but inspiration has a really short half-life,
Oh, absolutely.
A teenager needs a mechanism to stop a spiral when they're having a meltdown in the hallway. And this is where the curriculum pivots to a very practical toolkit.
High leverage moves they can actually use.
Yes. They focus on 2 practices, making failure a friend and mastering emotions. And Coach Matt delivers a standout framework for handling overwhelming negativity.
What does he tell them?
He tells the youth, it's okay to pause, but just don't park here.
I love that.
Right. He tells them to sit with their feelings, to name them, but to never change their address to that dark place. They advocate for a 24-hour rule as a guardrail. You have 24 hours to be furious, to be heartbroken, but then you have to actively move on.
The distinction between pausing and parking is just a brilliant way to explain emotional regulation without using clinical jargon.
It's an incredibly sticky analogy.
Mm.
But practically speaking, how does someone actually intervene on their own brain before they set up shop in a bad mood?
Because it's easy to just stay there.
Oh, I know. I've definitely pitched a tent and camped out in frustration for weeks at a time. If you're listening to this on your commute and you're dreading a conflict at work, how do you take a pause without permanently parking in that anxiety?
Well, the curriculum outlines a 4-step intervention to intercept that emotional refractory period. The first step is adopting an inquisitive nature.
Okay, what does that mean?
When an emotion hits, your amygdala, the brain's threat center, it wants to take over and react immediately. By pausing to ask yourself, why am I actually reacting so strongly to this? You force the prefrontal cortex to engage.
So you're decoupling your identity from the event.
Exactly.
So instead of saying, I am angry, it's, I am experiencing anger because my boss criticized my project.
Exactly that. You become an investigator of your own mind. Now, the second step is gaining a mature perspective.
Get some outside eyes on it.
Yeah. When we are parked in an emotion, our worldview shrinks. Seeking a mature perspective usually means allowing a trusted outside voice to look at your situation and offer a broader context that you just can't see through your own
Which
stress.
is why mentorship is so vital in this program.
Absolutely. The mentors listen, they ask simple questions like, where does that show up for you? Or what do you think that leads to long term?
Simple reframes.
Right. Then the third step is giving it time. That is Coach Matt's pause. Time naturally degrades the chemical intensity of an emotional spike. Reflection removes the edge from the reaction.
Makes sense.
And finally, the fourth step is acting with resolve. Once you've analyzed the emotion, gained perspective, and let the initial surge pass, you make a conscious decision on your next step. You don't just wait for the feeling to go away.
You choose an action that drives you out of that parking spot.
Because, as one of the mentors notes, we are the biggest thieves of our own confidence. It isn't the failure itself that destroys us.
It's the internal monologue we loop in our heads right after the failure happens.
Exactly. If a student fails a math test and immediately concludes, I am stupid and I will never succeed, they have parked. They have signed a lease in that dark place.
So the inquisitive nature intercepts that thought pattern and asks, did I fail because I am fundamentally flawed, or did I fail because I didn't study the right chapters?
And that slight shift in attribution is the absolute bedrock of a resilient mindset.
Okay, but that brings up a huge hurdle. Let's say you've taken your pause, you've intercepted the negative thought, and you're ready to act with resolve.
Right.
Looking at the sheer scale of what you want to achieve can be completely paralyzing. How do you move forward when the gap between where you are and where you want to be just feels insurmountable?
Well, this is the scale trap. We culturally romanticize massive overnight transformations. People attempt to overhaul their entire lives on a Monday morning. New diet, new workout, new mindset.
And by Wednesday, the cognitive load is so heavy they just abandon all of it.
Exactly. So Coach Kimberly introduces a concept to combat this that is so mathematically simple, it's brilliant. She tells the room, don't try to be perfect. Better is enough to get you going.
Just better.
She advocates for aiming to get just 1% better. She breaks down the math for them. If you get just 1% better at something each week, in 1 year, you are 50% better at it.
It applies the principle of compounding interest to personal development.
A 1% shift lowers the barrier to entry so much that the brain stops resisting it.
Right, it isn't about running a marathon. It's about putting on your running shoes. It's taking one deep breath before responding to a hostile email.
Because these micro wins are accessible, and more importantly, they are sustainable. The mentors know they aren't there to change the whole room in one day. If one kid makes a 1% shift, that's a massive win.
And securing those micro wins is critical because it builds a psychological foundation that cannot be faked, which is where Coach Blake brings up a fascinating psychological study about an art class.
This perfectly highlights the danger of empty praise.
I mentioned this in the beginning of the show, but let's lay out how this study actually worked. He tells the youth about an art class that was split into two groups. Group A received trophies, gold stars, and effusive praise for every single drawing they produced, regardless of how much effort they put in.
Just constant validation.
Right. Group B received absolutely zero fake praise. Their art was hung up, but no one told them it was a masterpiece if it wasn't. And within 2 weeks, every single kid in Group A quit drawing. They lost all interest.
Wow.
But the kids in Group B, they couldn't wait to get back to the canvas to keep improving.
It perfectly illustrates how extrinsic motivation can just hijack and destroy intrinsic drive.
But I really want to dig into the mechanics of this.
Yeah.
Why did the kids getting all the praise quit? I mean, our whole modern educational model seems built on validating kids constantly.
Yeah, it's like feeding someone a diet of pure refined sugar and expecting them to run a decathlon.
Exactly.
Well, the curriculum states a very clear formula. Words of praise without accomplishment equals self-doubt.
Really. Self-doubt.
Yes. When you praise a child, or an employee for that matter, for a mediocre effort, you are creating cognitive dissonance. The individual knows the work isn't their best. So when you call it a masterpiece, they realize your feedback is unreliable.
Well, you've cheapened the currency of your praise.
Exactly. If you lie to them about the easy things, they will never trust your encouragement when they actually face something difficult. It completely hollows out the value of the mentor.
Wow.
Furthermore, Group A became addicted to the dopamine hit of the reward rather than the process of drawing. When the novelty of the gold star wore off, the activity itself held no value.
So what's the formula for Group B?
The second part of the formula is words of praise with accomplishment equals self-respect. Group B had to work for their improvement. When they finally achieved something and felt proud of it, that internal satisfaction, that self-respect, became an armor that nobody could take away.
You cannot hand someone confidence. You can't award it to them with a certificate. They have to earn it themselves through those tiny, unglamorous 1% actions.
And that requires leaders and mentors to tolerate a significant amount of discomfort.
Right. You have to be willing to watch the person you are guiding struggle, knowing that the struggle is the only way they earn their own win.
It requires restraint, less talking, more timing. The leader has to step back and let the friction do its work.
Which perfectly transitions into how these mentors change the big picture perspective for these future leaders.
Yeah.
The lesson introduces a classic metaphor about a diamond. You know, how extreme pressure and time mold carbon into something beautiful.
It's a solid metaphor, but a bit abstract.
Yeah, and Coach Bob realizes this. So he steps in to ground the concept with a deeply vulnerable personal story. He talks to the room about his own childhood. He describes growing up in severe poverty, raised by a physically and verbally abusive father.
So he's showing them he really understands that baseline of trauma.
Exactly. He admits to feeling intense jealousy toward kids who had stable lives, money, and perfect parents. He felt like he was permanently parked in his circumstances, failing and getting into trouble.
He is validating that original point. Life was deeply unfair to him, and he felt the full weight of that isolation.
But then he shares a realization that completely shifted his trajectory. He introduces the metaphor of a pearl. He explains to the youth that when a grain of sand enters an oyster, it is a painful irritant. It is something the oyster never asks for and doesn't want. But in order to survive that irritant, the oyster begins to coat it, building layers around it to protect itself.
Right.
And over time, that exact irritant becomes a highly valuable pearl. Coach Bob tells the room that his abusive father was his grain of sand. He realized that if he had been handed a perfect life, he wouldn't have developed the grit to survive. His trauma became his competitive advantage.
That's at the essence of post-traumatic growth. I mean, he isn't saying the abuse was good or that it was necessary. He is demonstrating how you take the pain that normalized the room at the very beginning of the session and apply an internal alchemy to turn it into a source of power.
He credits this perspective shift to a sign he saw at a YMCA basketball court when he was just 10 years old. It read, "Winners never quit and quitters never win." He says he would repeat that phrase in his head while lying in bed in that chaotic house. As long as he kept stepping forward, he was a winner.
The vulnerability he shows there is just incredible. He isn't talking down to them from the top of the mountain.
No?
Because effective leadership often collapses when the leader positions themselves as an untouchable guru who has everything figured out. Coach Bob is showing them his scars. He is looking at a room of struggling kids and saying, I sat in that exact chair. I felt the anger and the urge to quit.
But this choice to reframe the irritant worked.
Right. He's saying it worked for me and it will work for you. He is validating the curriculum with his own survival.
He is living proof that you can take a pause, but you don't have to stay parked. And the curriculum wraps up with a quote from leadership author John C. Maxwell that ties all these threads together beautifully.
The quote is, "Resilience is not about how hard a hit you can give. It's about how many hits you can take and still keep moving forward, becoming better with each blow."
Coach AJ uses this to point out a statistical reality to the students. Winners actually fail significantly more often than losers. They fail 10 times more. The defining difference isn't an ability to avoid failure. The difference is that they refuse to let a failure dictate their next attempt. Quitting is simply the act of giving up on your next try.
If you look closely at the architecture of resilience, it is fundamentally an overcoming word. It requires the presence of an obstacle. If your environment is perfectly frictionless, you are not building resilience, you are just at rest.
The friction is the requirement for the growth.
Exactly.
Let's pull all of this together because we've covered a massive paradigm shift today. We started by looking at how the PL mentors established a baseline by normalizing the struggle. Life is inherently unfair, and acknowledging that reality is the vital first step to breaking the isolation of trauma.
Right. And we examined how deconstructing icons like Jordan and Biles proves that success is built on a foundation of public failure, and that true resilience sometimes means having the self-awareness to step back.
We unpacked the practical toolkit. Managing the emotional refractory period. Remember, it is necessary to pause, but you cannot park there. Put a 24-hour guardrail on your negative emotions and use the 4 steps to interrogate your anger before it dictates your actions.
And we explored the neurological danger of empty praise. Understanding that true self-respect can only be earned through the consistent, unglamorous work of making 1% shifts.
And finally, we saw how vulnerability can reframe the most painful parts of our past. And these are not just strategies to help youth navigate adolescence. These are foundational mechanics for anyone.
Absolutely.
Whether you are dealing with a derailed career, a creative plateau, or a major life upheaval, the tools to build that pearl remain exactly the same.
The obstacle isn't in the way. The obstacle is the way.
Exactly. So, to everyone listening right now, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Every single one of us has a grain of sand, an irritant, an unfairness we didn't ask for, a hurdle we didn't place on our own track.
We all have one.
If you look at your life right now, in this exact moment, are you treating that grain of sand as an excuse to stop swimming? Are you parked? Or are you actively doing the tiny 1% work to turn it into a pearl? Think about it. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.